Yeah, good afternoon. Earlier others also died. But what is this? What is this death of the other? Is it the other who passed away in the past? Was this other who lived earlier and not now no more? How can we understand that? Okay, what do you expect? Roland
Sir,
Barthes? Yeah. Yes. Yeah, Bhavya. So, what do you think? Who is that other? Did this Roland Barthes refer a particular author who died? What do we think? What can we understand? Okay, you may be surprised to see, you may be surprised to hear. He says that whoever may be the writer, as soon as he writes something, he is dead. As soon as he finished his writing and published a book, then he is dead. He is dead. He is dead. That is the death of the author. Okay, surely it seems a radical thinking. A radical thinking, entirely different thing. But he strongly argues that the author is dead. Okay, see, the death of the author. This is not any elegy. Okay, this is not any memorial writing on the occasion of the death of any particular writer. Okay, any particular author. This is the death of the author. That means here in his argument, in the argument of Roland Barthes, the writer or the author is dead once he published a book. Let me tell you in Telugu. పుస్తకం రాసి పబ్లిష్ చేయగానే రైటర్ చచ్చిపోయినట్టే రైటర్ చనిపోయినట్టే. This is the opinion of Roland Barthes. Okay, how he argued that and how he tried to prove that and how he made us to believe whatever he said. Okay, so dear students, let me go to discuss this point. Okay, in his history, Balzac, actually his main comments on the writings of this Balzac is a writer. Okay, he wrote a book, Saracen. Okay, Saracen, Sarrasine, Saracen. In that book, he discussed In Disguise of a Woman. He wrote a few lines. Those lines, now Roland Barthes mentioned. In his history, Balzac wrote, sorry, in his story, not history. In his story, Saracen, okay, Balzac described, okay, a castrato disguised as a woman. He writes the following. He writes the following. This was woman herself. This was woman herself with her sudden fears, her irrational whims, her instinctive worries, her impetuous boldness, her fuzzings, and her delicious sensibility. Okay, now taking this piece, taking this small piece from the book, from the story Saracen, that was written by Balzac, this Roland Barthes started his discussion. He started this discussion. Okay, here in this context, first he questioned, who is the speaker? Who is speaker thus? Is it the hero of the story? Is it the hero of the story as it was mentioned? That is castrato in disguise of a woman. Is it the hero of the story, bent on remaining ignorant of the castrato hidden beneath the woman? Or is it Balzac, the individual, furnished by his personal experiences with a philosophy of woman? Okay, this was a woman herself with her sudden fears. Is it the character in the story? Test this point. Is it the character? Is it the character of the story? Test this point. Or is it the Balzac, the writer, as an individual from his experience? Did he say this? Or as a writer, as an author? Okay, Balzac, the author, as an author. Okay, did he prophesize that thing? Three questions here. When the character in that story made that statement, okay, then okay, he questioned. Is it the hero in the story made that statement? Is it Balzac, the individual, not as a writer, the individual having some experience in such a way how the female had some sudden fears? Okay, could witnessed the irrational whims of the woman. Is it the Balzac who got experience of that? Or is it the writer Balzac, who prophesies? Okay, who may be a foreteller, who may tell the future? Did he say any future? This is the question. These are the three questions. For example, let me tell you, okay, you might have studied Hamlet. You might have studied Hamlet, you know. So in that Hamlet failed to kill his uncle at the right time. That failure led to many kills. Okay, you know one thing, the critics criticized that the character Hamlet has some psychological problem. The character Hamlet has psychological problem. And some other critics criticized that Hamlet, the story itself, has some psychological problem. Hamlet, the story itself, has some psychological problem. This is another discussion. Okay, in the third semester we discussed. Okay, then some scholars, they studied or they criticized that even the writer, that is Shakespeare himself has some psychological problem. Okay, three things were questioned there. In the same manner, here in this context also, three questions were posed by this Roland Barthes. He said that first he questioned, is it the hero of the story that made this statement about a woman? Is it Balzac, the individual, having some experience about the women? Did he say? Okay, did he make this statement? Or is it the writer, that is Balzac, as a writer, did he prophesy? Did he prophesy this? These are the three questions. Okay, then he says that. He says that. Okay, writing is the neutral composite. Writing is the neutral composite, oblique space where our subject slips away. And the writing is a neutral composite, oblique space where our subject slips away. The negative where all identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing. Okay, the negative where all the identity is lost. All the identity is lost. Whose identity is lost? The identity of the other is lost. The identity of the other is lost. That's why Balzac as neither author nor an individual can act in this work. Okay, because he lost. Balzac as a writer, as an individual, he lost himself. He has gone. He is gone. Right? So this is only the character in the story. This is only the character in the story that tells us that statement, according to this Roland Barthes. Okay, so all the identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing. Okay, better if you write this statement. Okay, identity is lost. All identity is lost, starting with the very identity of the body writing. Identity of the body writing. So dear students, here you have to understand the point that when, as soon as the body of writing got its identity, the body of writing got its identity, or a body writing, or when the writing took a particular shape, when the writing took particular shape in the form of a book, then all identity is lost. All identity of the author is lost. All identity of the author is lost. That is the point here. I think you got clear understanding of this point. As soon as the book got its identity as a book, as soon as the writing got its identity as a book, immediately the author lost, or the author lose his identity. The author loses his identity. That is the point here. That is the point here. Okay. See, the voice loses its origin. The voice loses its origin. Whose voice? The author's voice. The author enters into his own death. Writing begins. Writing begins. Better write down these 2 lines, dear students. Try to remember, or at least try to write on paper in your notebook. The voice loses its origin. Okay, now the voice loses its origin. Second fact is the author enters into his own death. The author enters into his own death. And the third point, writing begins. Writing begins. Okay, voice loses its origin. That is the oral form. Voice in the sense, the oral form of the writer, the oral form of the story that exists in the mind of the author. The oral form of the story that exists in the mind of the author. Okay, as soon as it loses, the voice loses its identity as all the ideas were put on paper. As all the ideas were put on paper. Once the book is published, once the book is published, the voice loses its origin. The author enters into his own death. The author enters into his own death. He dies ever. He himself dies. He himself dies. Then writing begins. Then writing begins. Okay. So these three things happen with the publication of the book. These three things happen once the book is published. Once the book is published, okay, the voice loses its origin. The author enters into his own death, and then writing begins. Writing begins. Okay. The author is a modern figure. The author is a modern figure, a product of our society. The author is a product of our society. This is a society which made him an author. This is the society which influenced an individual to become author. Okay, when an individual saw the indifferences, okay, and unity on the one hand, and indifferences on the other hand, suffering on the one hand, happiness on the other hand. Okay, when the individual experiences such things in the society, then this society will stimulate him to write a book, will motivate him to write a book. That's why the author is a product of the society. The author is a product of society, because one individual may become the author, when he encountered with the society. Okay, then he observes the society, he understands the society, then he gives his own reflections on society in the form of writing. That's why the author is a product of society. Emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism. Emerging, okay, from the Middle Ages with the English empiricism. Do you think that earlier there are no authors before this Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, and the personal faith of the Reformation? Okay, see here, emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, and the personal faith of the Reformation, it discovered the prestige of the individual, of, as it is more nobly put, the human person. Actually, the writer at the place of the writer got the prominence in the society, or got the prominence in the field of, in the domain of this literature from the Middle Ages. With English empiricism, okay, the French rationalism, and the personal faith of the Reformation. Okay, so it discovered the prestige of the individual. That age discovered the prestige of the individual. That age gave more prominence, or gave more weightage to the writer. Okay, sometimes, or ultimately we can say they nobly put this writer as a human person, this writer as a human person. Sometimes some people might have thought that this writer may be the prophet between the God and the human beings, between the God and these people. Such a weightage was given to the writer in the Middle Ages. That's why he mentioned that. Okay, he says that the Middle Ages, emerging from the Middle Ages with English empiricism, French rationalism, the personal faith of the Reformation, it discovered the prestige of the individual, as it is more nobly put, the human person, the human person. It is thus logical that in literature, it should be this positivism. In literature, it should be this positivism, the epitome and culmination of capitalist ideology, which has attached the greatest importance to the person of the author. Person of the other. Person in the sense of personal information of the other, personal details of the other, or the personality of the other. Okay, generally, in those ages, okay, the other, okay, to study any literary text, first we had to we had to study the character of the writer, the personality of the writer, his socio-economical and political status of the author. By studying all these things, we have to understand what type of character or what type of personality the author has. What type of personality the author has. Based on that, we have to interpret that particular literary text. Even based on that, we had to interpret even the poem also. What do you think? Such a weightage was given to the author in the Middle Ages. That's why he says, okay, that's why this Roland Barthes says, the author still reigns. That means still rules. Paripalinchadam. Okay, Rajyamaladam. Okay, the author will reigns in the histories of literature. In the histories of literature, we will give enough prominence to the author, his biography, biographical details, and his personality, his attitude. Okay, so the author still reigns in the history of literature. Biographies of authors, biographies of writers. In the biographies of writers, these authors, for example, Leighton Strachey, he wrote eminent Victorians. Okay, he gave life to some Victorian authors. In his book, he gave life. He made it a permanent imprint. What can we understand? The author still reigns or still rules. In the history of literature, biographies of the author or of the writers, in the interviews, even we may ask, tell me about Shakespeare, or tell me about John Donne, or tell me about John Milton, or tell me about Alexander Pope. Likewise, we may ask in the interviews. Even in the interviews, this author reigns. This author survives. Okay, in the magazines, okay, in the magazines, articles may be written. In those articles, surely there may be about the author, his greatness, his biographical details, such as the personality of the author, okay, the attitudes of the author, the lifestyle of the author, the thinking patterns of the author. Is it possible? Is it possible? They try to know. Okay, they try to interpret based on these things, apart from the original idea, what is written. Okay, so here the author still reigns in the histories of language, literature, biographies of the writers, interviews, magazines, as in the very consciousness of the men of letters, men of the letters. That means who wrote some books. Men of the letters means who wrote some books. Okay, so in the books, the other survives. The other survives. Excuse me. So, men of the letters, anxious to unite their person and their work through diaries and memories. Diaries and memories. Okay, those people, those writers. Okay, they tried to reign, or others made them reign in the books, in the works, and moreover, they tried to unite their person, their person in his unite their person and their work. Okay, they try to unite their person and their work, whatever the personality of the other, the same can be united by this work. That means these two were united, or tried to be united. Okay, the scholars, they tried to unite the other's person, that is the personality, with the work. They tried to find the personality in the work. Okay, but the problem for this Roland Barthes is that the people who says need not to follow the same thing. The people who says a moral statement, or a law, or a lawful statement, okay, he needs not to follow that. We can't ensure that whoever says something, whoever says whoever prophesies something, might have followed them, might have followed them. We need not to think that. Okay, చెప్పిన వాళ్ళు, నీతులు చెప్పిన వాళ్ళు అందరూ పాటించారు. The general sense, the general sense. If it is so, why should we search? This is the question for Roland Barthes. Why should we search for the personality of the other, in the work? That is the question. That is the question, right? So these students, here we can understand that, okay, those people, those scholars in the Middle Ages, they gave the uttermost prominence to the other, to his personality, to his attitudes and everything. Okay, so here they even the scholars, they try to unite the person of the other. Person means personality, the person of the other, and with with their work, with the work of the other. Work of the other is to be united with the personality of the other. How far is it possible? How far is it possible? Of course, in some works we can find autobiographical elements. It doesn't mean that the entire personality can be expressed in the work. entire personality can be expressed in the work. We need not to think. Okay. So the explanation of your work is always sought in the man. The explanation of your work, that literary work, is always sought in the man or woman who produced it. Who produced it? Okay. For the explanation, the people sought, or the people tried to know from the man or woman who produced that work. Who produced that work? Got this point? When a man or woman wrote something, okay, it could be possible to read. It could be possible to be read by any individual, any individual. But here the thing is that, but they try to get the explanation. They try to get the explanation of the work in the man or women who produced it. They are trying to know, okay, to get the explanation of the work, to get the answer or explanation of a work. For example, to understand the work that is a Hamlet, okay, according to this point, he mentioned, okay, they say they are the scholars. Let us suppose the scholars sought, okay, they try to know the personality or the individual life of the Shakespeare. Based on his individual life, they might have interpreted. They might have interpreted. This is the idea, what he mentions here. The explanation of your work is always sought in the man or woman who produced it. Okay, to get the explanation, to understand the book, to get the explanation of that book, okay, we used to see, or we used to approach the author. We used to approach the author. That's what Roland Barthes criticizes. Roland Barthes criticizes that. Okay, he says that. Okay, as if always sought in the man or woman who produced it, as if it were always in the end, as if it were always in the end, through the more or less transparent allegories of the fiction. The voice of a single person, the other, confiding in us. Okay, they try to find the other in us. They try to find the personality of the other in us. Okay, so that made us to know the personality of the other. Is the individual personality can be comprehensible? Is, or can the individual personality comprehensible? Can the individual personality be comprehensible? Okay, see here. The voice of a single person, that is the other. The voice of a single person, that is the other. Right? See here. The explanation of a work is always sought in the man and woman who produced it, as if it were always in the end, though through the more or less transparent allegory of the fiction. The voice of a single person, that is the other. That is the other. Okay. Through the sway of the other, remains powerful. Through the sway of the other, through sway in the sense here, influence. Through the influence of the other, okay, remains powerful. Okay. It goes without saying that certain writers have long since attempted to lessen it. In France, Mallam, M-A-L-L-A-R-M-E, Mallam was doubtless the first. Mallam was doubtless the first to see and to foresee in its full extent the necessity to substitute language itself for the person who until then had been supposed to be its owner. Okay, until then, until the publication of the book, until the finish of the book. Okay, surely that author may be the owner of that book. Author may be the owner of that book. For him, for us too, for him, for us too. It is language that speaks. It is language that speaks, not the other, not the other. This is the crucial point, dear students. This is a crucial point. I'm repeating again. It is language which speaks, not the other. Once the book is written, or once something is spoken, it is language which speaks, not the other. To write is through a prerequisite impersonality. To write is to reach that point where only language acts, performs, and not me. To reach that point, we have to reach that point. Okay, that is where only language acts. That is performance. The act of language, we can say the performance. Okay, so to reach that point where only language acts, that is performance, and not me. What can we understand? It is the performance. It is the performance of the language, not the performance of the other. Okay, until the completion of the book, surely this is the performance of the other. Once the book is published, okay, then we can say it is performance. That's what we can say. Language acts. The language acts. Got this point? So Mallam's entire poetics consists in suppressing the other in the interest of writing. Mallam's entire poetics consists in suppressing the other. Okay, in that the other we can find the suppression of the other in the interest of writing. In the interest of writing, other may suppress his personality. The other may suppress his personality. Okay, so see the relation between the writer and his characters. By making up the narrator, not he who has seen and felt, nor even he who is writing. but he who is going to write. Okay, see the relation between the writer and his characteristics. The writer and his characteristics. By making of the narrator, by making of the narrator, not he who has seen. Okay, so there is a relation between these two. According to this relation, there is something. That's what to be investigated. That's what to be identified. You see, by making of the narrator not he who has seen and felt, nor even he who is writing, but he who is going to write, he who is going to write. That is the young man in the novel, the young man. Okay, by a radical reverse, instead of putting his life into his novel, as is so often maintained, he made of his very life a work for which his own book was the model. Okay, by a radical reverse. Okay, instead of putting his life into his novel, actually, according to that personality, or according to Middle Ages ideology, okay, so putting their life into the novel. Those scholars, they put their life, okay, into his novel, as is so often maintained. He made of his very life a work for which his own book was model. Okay, so leaving aside literature itself, such distinctions rarely become individual. Okay, leaving aside literature itself, linguistics has recently provided the deconstruction of the other. Okay, the linguistics has recently provided the destruction of the other with a valuable analytical tool, by showing that the whole of the enunciation is an empty process, functioning perfectly without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. Leaving aside literature itself, linguistics has recently provided the destruction of the other. Linguistics has recently provided the destruction of the other with a valuable analytical tool, by showing that the whole of the enunciation is an empty process functioning perfectly without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. Okay, see here. Destruction of the other with a valuable functioning, with an empty function, performing without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. Try to understand this point. Even not only the literature, keep it aside. Not only the literature, keep it aside. The linguistics the linguistics has recently provided the destruction of the other. Destruction of the other. Okay, even this linguistics also provided some evidence. Even this linguistics is also some linguistics also provided some evidence for destruction or destructive study. Okay, see, destruction of the other in linguistics has recently provided the destruction of the other with a valuable analytical tool by showing that the whole of the enunciation is an empty process. The whole of the enunciation is an empty process, functioning perfectly without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. Okay, this empty process. Okay, this total thing, the total code of the language, is an empty process. Functioning perfectly without there being any need for it to be filled with the person of the interlocutors. Okay, interlocutors means partaker of the dialogue. So here we need, though it is an empty process. Then without need to fill it with the person of the interlocutors. So what can we understand here in that text? Okay, in that text, it need not to be filled with the person's interlocutors. Okay, persons of the interlocutors who take part in the conversation or who take part in the dialogue need not to be filled with the person. That is a personal point of view, person all the time. Throughout this text, maximum remember, person means personality. Linguistically, the other is never more than instance writing. Linguistically, the other is never more than the instance writing, just as I is nothing other than the instance saying I. Okay, if there is a sound, let us suppose if there is a word I, let us suppose. Okay, when I write, I am coming. When you read, you may read, I am coming. Who is coming now? Is the writer or is the reader? Who is coming? That is the question. Okay, until then it is empty. Process where in a particular context we may fill that empty vessel. By getting the clue within the language. It need not to be filled with the person of the other. It need not to be filled with the person of the other. That is the point here. Right? So when we write something, a statement, the others has to read that. When they read, okay, you might have written I, but when they read, they do not read you. They do not read it as you. Still, they pronounce it as I. Then, in that situation, whom does I refer? Is the speaker or is the writer? Okay, then there is a bafflement. Then there is a bafflement, right? See, bafflement in the sense confused. Okay, see, the author is never more than the instance writing. When there is an instance writing, when there is an example of the writing on the paper, then the author is no more. Then the author is no more. Just as I is nothing other than the instance seeing I. Okay, instantly if you say something, then it is I. Then that I will have some sense, or else up to then it remain as just an example, that is I, who may ever come to fill that word I. That may be Raju, that may be Ravi, that may be Kondalu, that may be Suresh, or that may be Ramesh, whoever it may be. Okay, so this subject, empty outside, of the very enunciation which defines it, suffices to make language hold together, suffices, that is to say, to exhaust it. Okay, so suffices to make language hold together, make language hold together. So language knows a subject, not a person here. Language knows a subject, not a person here. Okay, I am coming. I am coming. I is a subject. In the place of that subject, any word can be filled. Any word can be filled. Okay. So, see, language knows a subject, not a person. Okay. That subject in the language, there is subject. There is subject. In that subject, what can be filled? That can be filled. What can be filled? That can be filled. Right? Even if you write Rama is a clever boy. Rama is so this subject empty outside of the very enunciation which defines it suffices to make language hold together. Suffices, that is to say, to exhaust it. Okay, in that place, in the place of that subject, we can write something. In the place of that subject, we can write something. But that subject does not know the person, does not know the person. But we just write the word Rama. Okay, by writing Rama, okay, it is not enough. It is not enough to express the personality simply writing Rama. Okay, in the language, when you write Rama, then up to that it will take. When you write Rama, up to that it will take. Okay, the total personality of the Rama is not available in that subject. Of course, this argument may be confusing. Okay, you have to understand clearly. You have to understand clearly. Earlier, in the from the mid ages, the author was given more prominence. Okay, that's why the scholars, they try to read, they try to study, okay, the works with reference to the personality of the author. the personality of the other. He says that, this Roland Barthes, he says that in the work, there is no personality of the other. In the work of the other, there is no his personality in that work. That is the main point. But the earlier scholars, until this Roland Barthes, the scholars, they try to unite the person or the personality of the other, with the person, with the work of the other. They try to find the personality in the work. Okay, personality is personality, work is work. There is no connection between these two, according to this Roland Barthes. He separated these two. He separated the personality of the other from the text. That's why now we need not to study what is the background of the other, that is psychological, social, political, economical background. We need not to study now. To understand a literary text, we need not to study all those things. That is the argument of this Roland Barthes. That is the argument from this Roland Barthes. Okay, the removal of the other is not merely an historical fact or an act of writing. Just one word, removal of the other from his text. Now, this Roland Barthes, he proposed, or he is proposing one important point, that other can be removed from the text. Other can be removed from the text. As the personality of the author is removed from the text, here he removes the author from the text. Okay, the removal of the author is not merely an historical fact or an act of writing. It utterly transforms the modern text. Right? So up to now, dear students, we discussed how he proposed, how this Roland Barthes proposed that the other's personality need not to be united with the work of the other. Okay, so he separated the personality of the other from the text, from his work. But earlier what happened? From the Middle Ages, in English empiricism, in French rationalism, or in a faithful act of reformation. Okay, so this happened. Okay, the personal faith of the reformation. In these things, they try to unify, or they try to unite the person or the personality of the other with his work, and even they succeeded to do so. And that's why for the long time, the people, the scholars, they studied even the personality of the other to understand the literary text. Okay, they try to analyze the literary text from the personality point of view, from the personality of the other's point of view. What is this his personality? How he used to think? Based on that, the scholars, they used to analyze that literary text. They use it to analyze that literary text. Now, this Roland Barthes, he separated the personality of the other from the text. right? So dear students, here we can understand this point. We can understand this point. There is the removal of the other from the text. There is the removal of the other from the text. Okay, in the beginning he mentioned that the voice loses its origin, the author enters into his own death, writing begins. When the author is dead, then the writing begins. Okay, so the remaining topics, one more class may be there or two classes. Then with that, the topic may be finished. That's why, dear students, join the class